Next to you, I would very much like to do this present, being with you, with Gayatri Nuraine, with Pilar Quera, but I cannot because of the situation in which we are. And I would very much like to tell you that tolerance is precisely, it's not a matter of indulgence, no. It's to consider all the human beings equal in dignity. This is the fundamental, the essential pillar of all the human rights. All the human beings without any discrimination of gender, of sexual sensibility, of ethnia, of ideology, of belief, all equal in dignity. And if we have this in our very inner and very deep consciousness, we consider that we are all equal and that we must invent the future, that we cannot accept to be silent when the present trends are trends that are against this fundamental consciousness and consideration of equality. Tolerance, I repeat, is not indulgence. Tolerance is to think that we are all able to think, to imagine, to anticipate, to innovate, to create. Every human being is able to create. And this freedom, this capacity to invent the future, the personal, and to contribute to the collective destiny, this is our hope. Therefore, I would very much like to tell you that we must be every morning some minutes silent, thinking in what we can today do in order to contribute to this really greatness at the worldwide level. Because only in this way, only if we are able to consider that now, after so many centuries of silence, of fearful we were. Why? Because we were unable to know what was happening outside our most immediate environment. We were unable to know what was happening in other parts of the world. We were confined in a very limited square kilometers. And then now, in some aspects, because of the digital technology, now we are able, for the first time in history, we are able to express freely ourselves. We are able, for the first time, to tell what we think, not what they invent for us. We are inventing our own future, each of us. Therefore, yes, is a moment of hope, is a moment in which we cannot accept at all. We cannot accept at all that only some very big powers are giving us the great trends of our destiny. No, we must have a personal contribution. For the first time in history, now we have voice. For the first time in history, now the women that was completely marginated, for the first time now, she's progressively having this essential role in the new era. I remember, I like to mention this, when I was in one of my encounters with President Nelson Mandela. I was in Pretoria in 1996, and I told him that I was quite disappointed because of the very weak support to my program of a culture of peace instead of a culture of war. And he told me, in 10 or 15 years this will change, because the women will be the cornerstone of the new era. And I look at him telling why he will be, and he told me that because women only exceptionally uses force. Men only exceptionally do not. Therefore, now we can express ourselves. Now we the peoples, as it is said in the Charter of the United Nations. Now we the peoples can and we must express our views and our opinion and our beliefs, because now is a moment in which we are changing. We must change our future. We must invent our future. I would like to end telling you that now we have very clear that the peace depends on our behavior.
So you've seen a man who lives his values and continues to be passionate about this value of tolerance and establishing a culture of peace. So our main feature today is a conversation between a yogi and an Episcopal priest. But this will not be a typical talk or a lecture. You've been invited to join a conversation among friends. There's a rich history among these friends, and hopefully, I know they're going to share stories, their personal journey, their spiritual roots, and I also know there will be deep truths expressed along. So first, I'd like to introduce Canon Lloyd Casson. Canon Casson, who likes to be referred to as Lloyd, is an Episcopal priest and Rector Emeritus at Saints Andrew and Matthew in Wilmington, Delaware. This is where he resides now. And this is a very unique parish, having been joined by, as the name implies, two parishes, one a predominantly Black parish and the other predominantly white. Canon Casson, or Lloyd, has been a spiritual leader for more than 40 years, and he's active in urban and social affairs, world issues, and interfaith matters. He served here and abroad, and it was our good fortune that he was serving at St. John the Divine in New York in the 1980s, when the Brahma Kumaris knocked on his door and the friendship began. I'd like to now introduce Veronica McHugh. Veronica hails from a very small town in the north of Ireland, Castledurg in the county Tyrone. She describes herself as a traveler, and it was along her travels, also in the late 70s, early 80s, that she met a very tiny woman and a small group of people in London who were teaching meditation and offering some spiritual knowledge. Daddy Janki, who later became the administrative head of the Brahma Kumaris and just passed on in March, was Veronica's mentor and her lifelong friend. It was Daddy Janki, who was instrumental in asking Veronica to come to Florida for 3 months. And 30 some years later, she's here. She's still here. Who can leave Miami, right? Veronica is the director of the center in Miami and oversees all of the Florida operations and serves on the USA Board of Directors for the Brahma Kumaris. So Veronica still is a traveler, only now she travels via Zoom. She's been all over the world and now traveling in the vehicle of Zoom. So welcome Veronica, who people like to call Wadi, and welcome Lloyd.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I was thinking yesterday about how we're going to kick off this conversation, and I didn't want to overlook the obvious, that both of you, Lloyd and Veronica Wadi, both of you have dedicated yourselves to a spiritual life for decades. And you live and you work in community and you serve with you serve all over the world with members of your communities. And I'm curious, actually, how it is. This is no small thing that you both dedicated your lives to the spiritual life. And I'm curious how it was that you became oriented towards a spiritual life. Was it something in your upbringing? I know in Irish families, there was always a hope that somebody would be a priest or a nun in every family. Not yours, okay. Or was there some experience, or how did this, what were the roots? What are your spiritual roots? Lloyd, would you like to
Yes,
get us started?
yes. Om Shanti. Happy Diwali. I must say before I respond how wonderful I felt the opening of today's conversation. The whole thing. It's already, the stage is really set for a great conversation. I'm grateful. I can't really answer your question just because I think I've always felt this way. I can remember when I was a very young boy that, first of all, I need to tell you that there are many clergy people in my family. My uncles, my grandfather, just, lots of people. People used to say about me, and I didn't know why, that boy's going to be a preacher. And I don't know whether it was because I went around preaching, which I did a lot of that. I used to preach to whatever was in front of me, people, kids, toys, whatever. I think I really, just in my environment, there's a kind of religious overtone in those days, in the Black community especially. I mean, everybody was connected to church. Not all the same churches. I mean, people were Roman Catholic and lots of different Protestant denominations. And we just were all enveloped in each other's lives. I was early on as a child going to vacation Bible school. It was sort of recreational, but also quite educational. And it was a kind of experience that we had going from church to church. And when I was in junior high school, I was taken to by a club that I belonged to, a YMCA junior high club. And the advisor of the group, who happened to be Greek, decided to take us around to experience other religions. And so early on, I'd been in a synagogue, not a mosque in those days. There weren't any mosques around at that time. But most of the other Protestant traditions and Roman Catholic Church and so on. I think the other thing is that I had this priest, Father Wilson, who I will never forget, and I think he's the reason I'm a priest today, is because he was such a Pied Piper around kids. And very early on, he would come into the neighborhood and be with us and so on, and bring us into the church, bring us into choir and acolytes and so on. So I think it's just always been a part of my life. I could go on. I don't want to, overwhelm the conversation. But I think I've always had a sense of connection too, with the divine, by whatever name. And I just think that's sort of how I began. Doesn't mean that my life was all hunky-dory. I had lots of issues and problems and so on. But that was a highlight. One more thing, and I'll stop. When I was a soldier, by that time, I was so enmeshed in all this that I would walk around chanting the creeds and the stuff that from our church and so on. It was a way of comforting me in some very difficult times there too. I could go on, but that's a good.
Wadi?
Yeah, I guess mine was a little bit more of a circuitous route to where I ended up, despite being born into a staunch Roman Catholic Irish family. Always interested in religion, not so much in the devotional or the ritual. And I was very young, actually. I'm remembering like 8 years old or something like that, when I somehow knew about reincarnation and was afraid to express it in case I might get excommunicated. And so after leaving home and my travels began, it was the pull to spirituality, the pull to, I suppose, truth. Didn't necessarily think it was God that I was looking for to begin with. That was a constant. And I did know that my leanings were definitely towards Eastern philosophy. And then somewhere along the line, I realized that all of my traveling, all of my seeking was that it wasn't just for the adventure and the novelty of it, but that I was a seeker and I was a pilgrim. I was on a pilgrimage. And I found home when I came to the Brahma Kumaris. Simple as that.
Well, I'm curious that both of you had experiences with a significant Pied Piper. And for you, Wadi, it was probably Daddy Janky, right? And for Lloyd, Father Wilson. What did you particularly take from them that enabled you to find home? Maybe you, Wadi, since you were just talking.
Oh, well, the one thing, the very first, and thank you for reminding me of it, in the very first meeting with Daddy Janky, when I was exploring their philosophy, I was like not more than 7 days into it. And something that Daddy Janky did was the first time I'd met her. And it was simply her way of looking at me and a gesture that she made, which said, I know you, and you don't ever have to do anything you don't want to do. And that was the beginning of my relationship with Daddy Janky. So she touched my heart. And then the heart being touched, the heart gets things first. And so that allowed at some level for the head to begin to open up to these new ideas.
Thank you. Lloyd, how about your Pied Piper, Father Wilson?
Well, it's almost similar. I think what he did for me was to help me to discover the truth about myself. Growing up in a very segregated time, to help me to experience the truth of my own reality, that I wasn't defined by whatever anybody said or however anybody described me, or even how I was treated. That I'm a pure being, connected to God, he would say. I can hear him saying it now. That when God created the heavens and the earth, he said, it's good, it's all good, you're good. And so instead of original sin, he would say, I can still hear him saying it, it's original blessing. You're an original blessing, and you're meant to be a blessing in the world. He was very much concerned about service to the community and so on. But he always thought that it was important to begin with knowing yourself and knowing who you are, so that you can then be a liberator in the community.
This is a wonderful beginning, I think, to our conversation. And Lloyd, stay with you for a moment. It all sounds very lovely, but I know there must have been very tough times along the way for you. So it brings us to this question of tolerance. How, from those very early years, and then your relationship with Father Wilson and coming to know yourself, how then did you begin to develop an understanding about tolerance and find its place in your life?
It took a while. And I think it's because, again, I grew up in a really all Black community. It was really a village, and it was for me as a child. It wasn't a problem. I didn't know what I was being dealt with, and you know how people were defining me. I went all to Black schools from kindergarten through high school. That's just the way it was. And my relationship to white people at the time was basically a sort of required respect, is the way I would define it, or fear, and sometimes resentment, depending upon, but not any real. Had no relationships at all, to tell the truth, other than every once in a while, our schools would join other high schools. Eventually in like athletic events and so on. And believe me when I tell you, it didn't start that way. We played football with other Black high schools in the region, but not with our own white high school team in our own city. It was just an incredible time. Discrimination in movies, I could go on and on and on. I think it took a while. I think I need to say that, African Americans and Blacks are not homogeneous. And so there are all kinds of people in the Black community. I mean, they were gay and straight and, people with different ideas and so on. And so I think I had a level of tolerance in the sense that, there were lots of different ideas and points of view. But in terms of racial tolerance, it really was only after I joined the Army shortly after high school, and that really threw me into a very different kind of a ball game. And I got to meet people and to discover ultimately that these were my brothers. Now, I didn't say that right away, and sometimes I said it before I meant it. I think it was because I was taught to think that way. But I really did have great friendships in the Army where our lives are all on the line for the same cause and all that sort of thing. And that does something to you in terms of gaining respect for other people and other people's religions and backgrounds and so on. It wasn't easy in the beginning. Now it's I'm a fanatic about it. Interfaith, interracial, just.
Now it's your nature.
Now it's my nature.
Wadi, knowing you, I know that something that's very part of your nature is always seeing the best in people. Was that part of your early training, or did you come to that through your own experiences?
I would have to give credit at some level to my mother. And it's funny because when I was thinking about this topic of tolerance, maybe my first experience of having to tolerate was also of my mother when I became a teenager. But growing up, and of course the situation in the part of Ireland that I come from, there are not to be compared with, but definitely many, many parallels with Lloyd's story. And the Catholics were not the ruling class. And there was different rules for one, different rules for the other. There was systemic discrimination and all of that good stuff. That was during my growing up in the 50s and the 60s. And my mother would have gone, and this would have been like in the late 1920s, to a one-room schoolhouse wherein both the Catholic and the Protestant kids were educated together. And some of those women who were Protestant were my mother's lifelong friends, even though they were even socially different in that they were professionals or whatever. But what I really appreciated was that, you know, the euphemism they would use was, you need to know what side of the house you're in, you know, which side of the house are you on? And so my mother never compromised the side of the house that she was on, but yet neither did she use it to have any animosity or hatred or dislike or anything else. And so that was something that I appreciated. You know, she was telling me a story about my grandfather and a farmer, and nearby was a Protestant farmer, and there was a reasonably good relationship there. But when the Protestant farmer was coming to visit, then my grandfather would remove from the main room a picture of the Blessed Virgin, because he didn't want to offend his Protestant neighbor. And so, of course, his grandkids, on hearing this, were outraged that he would do such a thing. But I looking at it, I can see how, for the sake of peace, this, I suppose, is one of the qualities of tolerance, you know. Yeah, so definitely influenced by the people with whom I grew up.
Yeah, well, it's clear that there have always been these opportunities for conflict or intolerance. This is not something that just emerged today, but let's fast forward to today. And given the situation today that we find ourselves in with the pandemic, with racial injustice, with concerns about a climate crisis, with political instability, there's been almost a hardening of these divisions, and we see it, you know, playing out every day, and actually a burgeoning concern about people's mental health as we struggle with these issues. So, what does tolerance look like today? How, you know, the topic was to use it, the torch of tolerance, as a means, a transformative means. So what do we think about when we talk about tolerance now? It's, I think, come to think we just have to grin and bear it, or stifle ourselves, or put up with things we don't like. So given that you both have this extraordinary experience and natural inclination and a lifelong service in pursuit of these goals, what's your take on today's situation and how we can use tolerance?
Well,
Lloyd?
yes, all right. I think for me, there's I feel a lot of pain. The pain for the world, because I sense just so much fear and fear of death, which is what all of this is about. And I mean physical death, I mean the loss of who I thought I was. All of that is wrapped up in what is coming, what is on the earth today. And it's all coming to some sort of a conclusion, I think. I think we're at a very interesting, to say the least, time. Who knows what this will bring? But I do believe that it's first of all, my not being afraid is important. Is to be just absolutely certain that I remain grounded in my own understanding of myself as a soul, as 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 God's love, not simply that I have love, but that's who I am at the core. That toleration is really, I think, an aspect of love. Love is the answer, so to speak. And toleration, compassion, these things are all a part of love. And so I think that becoming and really experiencing compassion, even for those who would not want to have anything to do with me, to be in their shoes and recognize the fear that they really have, even though it may be unconscious, they may not even be able to articulate it. I think that's true racially, actually. I think that the fear of having to let go of privilege and all that sort of thing, and a definition of myself that has given me life, and I'm threatening by saying, we need to be equal. So I think that's the approach. Now, so it's not war. It's nonviolent social and spiritual transformation and change that I think we need to be proponents of, and to act that out. And it's not all going to happen in our time. That's probably not going to happen in the years that I have remaining. It would be nice to be around to see what it looks like, but I know that I can see it. I can see it now. And so that's the hope. And I know that it sounds like I'm talking only about myself, but I know that if I'm not there, then I can't communicate that in any way to anybody else. I've spent many years of my life really dealing with this, addressing this problem. I helped to create, when I was in Washington, the Interfaith Conference of Metropolitan Washington, where you're bringing all faith groups together and having interfaith Bible study, if you can believe it, or scripture study. Just to, it was a way of sort of, breaking these walls down. I have one more thing to say, and that's taking my hat off to Daddy Janki and to the Brahma Kumaris. If you want to know where I really got saved, it was in Madhuban. Shortly after that event at a cathedral, when I went to Madhuban and I heard really the teaching of the Brahma Kumaris, and I felt so empowered. There was something about, I said to myself, that is informing my tradition, my faith. It's informing me. I can read the scriptures in a different way, with different eyes, and so on. So I have to say that the Brahma Kumaris, I'm still one. So Episcopal priest, Brahma Kumaris. So anyway, that's how I would respond to it.
So the Pied Pipers do not just stay within their own circles.
No. It's not possible. Yeah.
So Wadi, you were going to say?
I'm not sure what I was going to say, other than that everything that Lloyd has just said, I agree with. And whether we're dealing with what might look like the masses, like responding to the mass situation, or bringing it back to the self and to those personal situations. And I remember once when I was in India, and I was in what was then called Calcutta. And at that time, it really was a very, very, very dirty city, and such that, the dirt would be caught in your eyes, it would be in your nostrils, everything. And I came back to the place where I was staying with a group of young Brahma Kumaris. And there was a young woman from Germany, and she had a metal bucket, and she was washing. And I said to her, you know, because there were facilities for that, I said, "What are you doing?" As she's scrubbing away, and she said, "Well, I'm just making Calcutta a little bit cleaner." And so that was her contribution, which I thought was, you know, very telling. And that's kind of what it is. That what is it that I'm being called to do? And, you know, where Lloyd's saying that it's to do with hurt. And certainly every time I see anger, I know that there's pain behind it. And so it might look like I understand what people are demanding, in a sense, because often it will come in the form of a demand. But in truth, it is things like peace and love and understanding that is being asked for. You know, when it comes to tolerance, you're never going to hear anyone say, unless they're joking, "Oh, I have to tolerate all this love. I have to tolerate all this happiness. I have to tolerate all this peace." Of course not. So the assumption that what is it that requires tolerance? And I remember Daddy saying, you know, about the different kinds of tolerance, that one is where you're enduring, you're really putting up with something, but it's almost like as if it's with force. And often when it's like that, then you will easily complain, you'll easily get distressed, you will put yourself in a victim mode. So then you do not become effective in getting out of that situation, you know? And then she said the other one is where, yes, circumstances are the same, but applying spiritual principles, you adapt. And then, of course, the third thing is where someone didn't even notice that they had to tolerate something, you know. And so it's to do with maybe approaches to different things, and that somehow comes back to the individual, because there is a big learning within every one of those things, you know, whatever is the situation or the circumstance. Yeah.
Well, given what you've just said, Wadi, I want to turn to Lloyd for a minute. Is there anything that you just simply cannot tolerate?
Well, James Baldwin, somebody I admire, said this a long time ago, and it's been a part of me. And that is that the only thing I think that I can't tolerate is when I cannot tolerate oppression against myself, or denial of my own humanity. I mean, I can say, well, you can believe anything you want to believe, and you know, that's fine. Or I'm, you know, we're all together in this and so on. But someone who wants to, it's unacceptable that somebody views me as inhuman, as not human. To me, that's unacceptable. It's unacceptable that we don't share dignity at some level, or at least it's unacceptable that anybody thinks that I do not have the right to live. No, I'm not going to go to war about it. You know what I mean? I just know who to leave alone and all that sort of thing. But I could honestly say that to me that would be intolerable. To know that I am my childhood. If I had the thoughts, the mind that I now have, a lot of what I experienced then, I would call intolerable. Intolerable. It's intolerable to live in a situation where my humanity is constantly denied, and that it's systematized, and it's in the law. And it wasn't just people, the way people were relating to me, it was in the law. So that to me is intolerable. That's why I've been a civil rights activist. That's why I've been there, because the situation is intolerable. And so what I can tolerate is the recognition that all these people, we share humanity. I can only be what I ought to be when you're who you ought to be, and vice versa. And so that's the I think that's what's motivated me all this time. I don't know whether I've answered your question. But
Yeah, yes. Do you think it's important that we acknowledge that certain things are intolerable?
yes, I do. I honestly do. Now, I think for me they are fundamental. I mean, for example, it's not every sin, every peccadillo, and so on that I find intolerable. God is a forgiving and loving God, and forgiveness is also a part of love. So that's not it. It's that yeah. So yes. The answer is yes. There are some things that I think it's all right to recognize that this is not tolerable for human life. That's really what I'm saying. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
And how about, where does acceptance come into all of that? Because I know there's a sort of feeling, well, you should accept what's happened and just move on. But how do you do that when certain things are intolerable?
Well, the only thing I can do is to accept that these are my feelings, and that's important too. To accept, to tolerate, to be tolerant of myself, even my own foibles and flaws and so on, is to acknowledge and recognize the presence of my own. That's the reason I can be so tolerant with everybody else. It's because all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, as the scriptures say. uh, but but it's so I can accept. I think of George Wallace. I don't know whether that name means anything to you or not. Governor of Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
I can accept the tolerance that helped enabled him to gain a whole new perspective on life, and to recognize how his intolerance was such a terrible thing. But it took a lot. I can tell you, for the citizens, the black citizens of Montgomery and so on, to believe him at first. It was hard to believe. He was such a vicious racist. Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, or something like that. And but he really did. I can see this photograph of him in a wheelchair, and lots of black men and women standing around him. It was incredible.
I remember that.
Yeah.
It's funny when Lloyd's saying that, then I would have to say that that Ain Paisley is the same character is the George Wallace of Northern Ireland, and where he ended up being such fast friends with Martin McGuinness, who had been his avowed enemy and even part of maybe the IRA, to where they were known in the media as I think it was the Giggle Brothers, they called them, because they found each other such good company, and so that's the thing with, when there's tolerance, the one thing, or one of the things that tolerance will allow is compromise.
Yeah.
Whereas before which you are rock solid about your position and your righteousness and whatever else, and you're not going to be moved a quarter of an inch. But when there's genuine tolerance, and again, we saw this, I think the classic one was Mandela,
Yeah.
demonstrated this, and then that I mean, tolerance filled with so many things, and where it protects your ability to discern, I guess, and discriminate and make the right call in situations. And going back to the question that you asked Lloyd, I was thinking, what is it that I find intolerable? And the first thing that comes to mind, or the recognition that it means that it would hurt my heart so much. You know, that it wasn't a question of offending. I don't know what it's offending, but that my heart would be very, very hurt. And I think the two things, and they're both really part of the same category, and that is, I used to put it in the context of kids and kitties, you know, that animals and children. And the reason being, they're innocent.
Yeah.
And so offending innocence is something that I would find intolerable and would have to deal with.
I agree with that too.
Okay, then let's take a pause. And sometimes in the moment of silence and in reflection, some of the questions all just evaporate or get answered. And I think that obviously some of what you're saying is really sparking a lot of interest and some agreement, some disagreement. But let's take a moment to pause. We have a wonderful piece of music by a well-known Canadian musician, jazz musician and vocalist. And it's a great opportunity to help us begin to see these things more clearly now.
I can see clearly now, the rain is gone. I can see all obstacles in my way. Gone are the dark clouds that had me blind. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. I think I can make it now, the pain is gone. All the bad feelings have disappeared. Here is that rainbow I've been praying on. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. Look all around, there's nothing but blue skies. Look straight ahead, nothing but blue skies. I can see clearly now, the rain is gone. I can see all obstacles in my way. Gone are the dark clouds that had me blind. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. nothing but blue skies. Look straight ahead, nothing but blue skies. I can see clearly now the rain is gone. I can see all obstacles in my way. Gone are the dark clouds that had me blind. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day.
Thank you very, very much, Denzel. As you can see or hear, Denzel Sinclair is a wonderful, fantastic vocalist and musician. And I'm very happy to say that he's today with us here live. So Denzel, welcome.
Thank you.
I'd like to invite Denzel to offer some thoughts himself on what he's heard and maybe a response, and share some thoughts with us, Denzel.
Well, thank you. And good morning, everyone. Happy Diwali. An honor to be here with you this morning and to have been able to make a small contribution to this great program. And awareness, perspective, are some of the things that pop out in terms of, you know, moving from darkness to light. It's, you know, when someone shares something with you and you're like, ah, I see now. You know, you get a little bit of wisdom or just knowledge is light. I'm also drawn to think about the phenomenon of cycles, and, you know, especially thinking of the seasons of the year, depending on where you live in the world. Sometimes the seasons are extreme in their differences, and, you know, as much as we would love, well, you're fortunate down there, Wadi Ben, Veronica, in Florida. You've got eternal spring almost, but for some of myself here in Canada, we get the extreme changes. And as much as you would like for it to be balmy in December, we know that, you know, in December it's cold and blizzards and things like that. That is consistent with that time. As in, you know, summer, it's lovely. Spring is the best. Fall is a little cool, but so we might complain during the other parts of the year, but we know that those are consistent with that time. And so that gives you the capacity to live through that and move on and know that all is indeed well. It's just maintaining that the larger picture too, and to maintain the ability to overstand. There's a saying, people play on the word understand, especially in the Caribbean community. I've noticed they use the word overstand, and again, for us to be able to have to maintain a you know, bird's eye view, if you will, whereby the walls on the ground level are obstacles, but from higher up, we can see ahead. We can see the broader picture. It's a different, certainly it's challenging at times, you know, to maintain that. It's almost like tolerance. It would be like a capacity to sustain. Can you imagine the capacity to sustain a divine vision, to sustain dad? I like to refer to God as dad, actually. Imagine holding dad's vision. It's like, you know, in a way, we're all guardians in a sense of when we were little kids, and when the kids are unwell, they're sick, we don't behave very well when we can be cranky, but as parents, as the adults, with a modicum of a little more wisdom than children do, although I would argue that as children, we are equally wise, but we know that the child is just not well and is just cranky, and we just hold the vision because we know that that's not the way they are. And so that vibration, it rubs, you know, it's like water off of a dog's back that enables us to just it's like a lot of things now have become active. You know what I'm getting, I might be going off a little bit. Cut me off. I wasn't expecting to riff this much, but I'll cut it short. I feel that, and I know this is almost cliche, you know, we've become human doings as opposed to human beings, but I think it's irrelevant in that, you know, love tends to be referred to as an active verb, like you love, whereas maybe it's being more like this, you know, as Brother Lord was sharing earlier, you being love, not doing love. You don't do love, be love. And in the same way, I feel that that's a similar energy with tolerance. Is not something you do, it's just your energy absorbed. It's like the ocean. And also, you know, it's interesting, there's the three, you know, facets of tolerance that you shared, Wadi. But then there's also that, you know, suffer little children who come unto thee. The word suffer can often only be thought of as a negative thing when you suffer, but there's also, you know, you can suffer love, you know. It's I don't know if enduring is the word, but it just is, you know, you experience it, you I guess endure it, but not in the negative sense. Just we exist, we live, so we must experience. So more sort of an experience. So yeah, just reawakening or rejuvenating our unlimited vision, perhaps taking the timeline, moving from a linear fashion and into, you know, taking the ends of the timeline and bringing them together. There's a beautiful image in the African heritage culture, the Sankofa bird, whereby the image is the bird reaching back for an egg, and it's like going back to fetch something before you lose it. But it's really, I feel that it's, you could say you're going back to get to how you were. So you're going back into the past, but you're also going into the future as well. And so that Sankofa, that awareness, I find, affects the other symbol, Ubuntu, so meaning humanity. And I feel that humanity, Ubuntu is akin to our interaction, our relationships. So our Sankofa, our awareness affects our relationship. So the more we realize we're a family, and, you know, we have older siblings, we have newer siblings, we have some of our siblings are a little closer to our parents than the younger ones maybe aren't as closer to the older ones, you know, but we are all family. So anyway, that was more than I anticipated to share. Thanks for listening. And
Thank you, Denzel.
For the inspiration.
We know artists bring a special something. They're the special sauce to the conversation.
Yeah, that little hot air.
No, not at all. So you also mentioned vision, but Lloyd, or why do you want to respond to what Denzel has just shared?
I certainly I loved what Denzel just said. And I think there's that's true. It is being loved, and it is holding on to the vision that all of us are together in this. That we really are siblings, even when the current realities would say otherwise. Is to hold on to the vision, what I call the vision that God has planted in each of our hearts. And just hold on to it. There's a Jewish woman, a Danish woman who died in the concentration camps. And she was, in her diary, she was talking about the need to keep a space in her heart for God. And that she was talking about how people who were getting ready to be taken off to concentration camps were all packing up their stuff to make sure that it's safe and all that sort of thing. And she says, what we need to do is make sure that we keep the space for God, who dwells there. And that's what I think I heard you say. And I just think that's really very important.
The image, and I won't try and pronounce the name of that.
Sankofa.
That's right. The idea of going back to get something. And I think from what I recollect is like it's okay to go back. But the point is, the reason why it's okay to go back is because it belongs to you.
Exactly.
That you forgot that thing, and that's where we're at.
That
we forgot. And this is the time, and the chaos will even contribute to our being reminded. And I like how most of you know Sister Mohini and how she often puts it, which allows for some kind of easy acceptance, that we're all reading the same book, but we're all on different chapters or different paragraphs or whatever, but we're all reading the same book.
Yeah.
You did good.
One person shared that it wish it was the International Day of Acceptance and not the International Day of Tolerance.
Yes.
For me, and I think this is a very common point of view, for me, tolerance implies that I put up with or tolerate or endure or show patience. I don't need to tolerate anything that I accept. Would you agree?
I would certainly say one of the things, you are not going anywhere further until there is acceptance.
And Lloyd, someone says the word tolerate is not what we should be doing. It should be interchanged with love. We should be loving. What do you say to that? Would you agree?
Well, you could say that, because as I said earlier, I see tolerance really as an expression of love. Tolerance, compassion, truth, justice, mercy, that's love. And so tolerance in that sense is acceptance. On the other hand, but forgiveness, that's love. So to tolerate, to be tolerant of a situation, to be able to even forgive wounds that have been inflicted upon you, all of that that's love. When I say something is intolerable, I'm not so sure that I mean by that line is so drawn that I'm ready to go to war. As Wadi said, I think earlier in one of her responses, discernment comes up, and we figure out what to do, what to say, how to be in this situation. So we're not reactive. We're being. We're being who we're meant to be. Anyway, I just said a long answer. You said not to do that. Okay.
One last question, and there was a comment that the example of the piece that occurred in Ireland was a great example of moving forward with understanding, with love and compromise. We can do the same here in the United States by meeting in the center. And this,
Do you mean the
this-
meditation?
Is that a
center?
plug? Is that an
Yeah,
advert?
Exactly.
Shameless plug there? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think
Please
that's
hit
what
like
that's
if you like
meant.
this one, and please hit subscribe if you really liked it.
And a final question. Would you say a bit about tolerating difficult emotions, not just situations?
I'm going to share something that happened this morning. You know, when the person made the comment about isn't love just, is it easier to love or is it easier to be tolerant? Tolerance can be learned. I don't think that we all have, I mean, idealistically, yes, love, but I don't think we have the fullness of love yet. But I do know what tolerance looks like, and I do know what the result of tolerance is. And so I can apply it. So this morning in meditation, it was a situation exactly like this, where there were all these people on Zoom, and I happened to be on the main camera, I suppose, leading the meditation. And so there was total silence. We're all in meditation together. Everybody's on mute, except for one person. And you could hear them unceremoniously slurping their coffee or their tea or whatever it happened to be. And so it's like the first thing, a little indignation, a little irritation, a little self-righteousness, and, you know, who's doing this? You know, don't they know better? And then just tempering it and realizing that this is something that is needed in those situations, with a sense of humor, you know. And so the humor allowed me to be tolerant. And the other thing that again, if you'll permit me, is recognizing also in myself where taking an action against intolerance, you know, taking an action against intolerance many, many years ago. And for the action itself, I will never apologize, but it was then maintaining that thought that what I did, you know, or of my own self-righteousness, and cutting someone else out and not allowing love to flow. So it wasn't the action that was wrong, but it was the subsequent feeling towards the person who was intolerant. And by my cutting them out, maybe they could even have learned or acquired tolerance in that time frame. So that for me is something that I have to watch out for, is like the continuing thought of, or justifying your own action in the face of intolerance.
Lloyd, any comment?
Well, I think that's right. I think putting oneself in another's shoes helps to do that. I know once I was preaching a sermon at a funeral in a congregation, and during the sermon, phone kept ringing, and I was like Waddy, just really getting more and more upset. And thinking, do I stop and tell somebody to turn off their phone, or do I just continue preaching? And I continued the sermon. And all of a sudden, I don't even know what brought me there, but I realized that it was my phone in my pocket
No.
that was ringing. And so I was able, speaking of humor, that was the only thing I could do, is say to everybody, sorry, I reached it, you know, and turned the phone off, and we all had a chuckle. But I think it is, you know, kind of a metaphor for being aware of your own flaws. You know, and so even in expressing concern about somebody else's intolerant behavior, to begin even by recognizing that in yourself. I know, I think I know what you're feeling because I felt that way too, but, or something, along those lines.
I know we're running short on time, and I hope we may run a few minutes over because we have a very special response that sort of fits this part of the discussion in terms of sharing and a personal experience from a very important artist and playwright from South Africa.
My name is Fatima Dige, and I'm a playwright. I write plays, which means I'm a storyteller. And I have a little story to tell you about an experience I had around the virtue of tolerance. 3 years ago, I wanted to do a play in my community. We have a little theater at the back of our Arts and Culture Center here in Langa called Gugastebe, but we have no lights. So I borrowed lights and a lighting board from the theater at Artscape. The play ran successfully for 2 weeks. Everybody enjoyed it. We had discussions about the topic every night, which is what I was really looking forward to. So on the Thursday night, when the run of the play ended, we locked up and I went home. On the morning of Good Friday, there was a knock on my door at about 8 o'clock. And when I opened, there were the security guys from Gugastebe, the Arts and Culture Center, and they came to tell me that the lighting board had been stolen. I think I felt as if the sky fell on me that morning, because this is a piece of machinery that costs over 200,000 rand. Anyway, somebody from the technical department arrived and went to the police station to open a case. We had a statement. It was stamped by the police so that the theater could claim from their insurance. But when I went back to work, the head of the department who had given me the lighting board was so upset with me that every time he met me in a public place in the theater, he would embarrass me by asking me where the lighting board was. And when I would explain to him that the lighting board was stolen, he told me in front of everybody that he didn't believe me, that I had stolen the lighting board myself. And this continued for about a week. Every time he saw me, he would just tell people in public, she lost the lighting board. And I was beginning to lose my patience about this because I knew I hadn't stolen the lighting board. The lighting board was stolen. But at the same time, I lost the lighting board and I felt very guilty about that. So I sat down and I replayed the whole thing in my mind just to understand where he was coming from. The lighting board did not belong to him. It belonged to Artscape. He was not the head of Artscape Theatre. There was another person who was above him, who was his boss, who was most probably doing the same thing that he was doing to me on a daily basis around the issue of the lighting board. So I went to his office to apologize to him. He was inside his office talking on the phone, and I was having a conversation with his assistant. When he came out and saw me, the first thing he did was to ask his assistant if I came to borrow anything and that he mustn't give me anything. And at that point, I just turned around and said, I came to talk to you. And he said to me, I don't want to talk to you. He told his assistant that he was going downstairs to have a smoke. And at that point, I got up and I said to him, so it's good, let's go and smoke together. And at that point, he just started to laugh. And I thought, this is a wonderful chance for me. I just took hold of his arm very gently and I pulled him to the table. I sat him down and I said to him, I understand where you are coming from because you gave me an expensive piece of machinery in trust and I lost it. So I have come to apologize to you about what happened. And I understand and I will understand next time that you will never trust me with anything after what has happened. He didn't say anything. He just got up, gave me a hug and kissed me on my forehead and went downstairs to smoke. And I was left with a smile on my face. I was happy.
Thank you. That was Fatima Dipek from South Africa, a playwright. And I think the operative word for Lloyd, Fatima, and Wadi, laid with a smile on your face. So one last question, and then we'll have a closing. Lloyd and Wadi, the question was asked, should we always stand up to intolerance? And hopefully without anger?
You can't always stand up to intolerance because there's so much of it. But what you can do is, I think, is to recognize just how many issues there are, how many problems there are, how many issues and problems are created because of intolerance in so many different places. And like the friend who took the bucket to scrub a little bit of Calcutta, I think that's the way to stand up to intolerance. We can address it lovingly, and by the way, lovingly also does mean, in my opinion, it does mean nonviolent action, social action is appropriate. Standing up for something wrong. I do not disagree with people who go out with signs and exercise their First Amendment right to complain and to call for change, public policy changes and so on. I've been doing it all my life, and I will continue to at least make a phone call in my old age. I may not be able to get out on the street anymore, but and vote and all those things. I mean, this is not intended to turn your back on the suffering of the world and all of that. This is embolden you to do it from a different place, with power, with spiritual power, with discernment, with courage. All that's important.
I'm agreeing, of course, with everything Lloyd says, and my nature, despite my spiritual training, tends towards being a little bit confrontational. And so there's certain things I would confront, but hopefully I would have the wisdom when to know better, when, someone's so many chapters back there that there's just no point in talking to them from up here. But the point being too that every time that I exercise tolerance, then it means an increase in my inner power. And that inner power then has a capacity to work on others as well. And I think that's what I need to be doing.
And this is a great place to ask both of you as spiritual leaders to share with all of us what a prayer or a reflection or a blessing you might have as we look ahead during these times. Wadi, since you're...
Were you going to ask for a metaphor? Then maybe let me put it in that context. When I was thinking, because you had mentioned about a metaphor for it, I guess the image that came is of a bald eagle in its eyrie, way up on the mountain, on the cliffside. And that not only is it able to look down and discern and see everything, but it's also protected by its nest. And that nest is also where it, as Lloyd had said earlier, that it invents, it creates. And so that then contributes towards the creation of the vision that we want. So that's would be how I would see tolerance.
That's great. I like that. Lloyd, a prayer, reflection?
I have a prayer, and it is the prayer that is attributed to St. Francis. And I say it all the time. So some of you probably know that that's what I'm looking to say. But the reason I love this prayer is because of its, I think it sums up what I was saying earlier about love and tolerance, peace, compassion, forgiveness, understanding. All of these are qualities of love. And so tolerance is a virtue. And this is a prayer really to help me not only to tolerate, but to give expression to it. So it goes like this. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. Give me some.
Amen. And it's already done, Lloyd. We are that.
Yes, we are.
Can I just add, Kathy, and I'm going to quote Paul Simon and one of his songs, with which I'm sure most certainly of my age group are familiar, and that is All Gone to Look for America, right? And that to me, tolerance would be the way and the goal in finding it.
Thank you. We'll add that to the playlist for this conversation. But speaking of music, if you can all transport yourself back to, I believe it was 1989 in St. John the Divine Church in New York City, there was a grand program that everyone here, well, Wadi and Gayatri and Lloyd were part of. And it was filled with musical expressions. And one of them we have to bring to you now. Just so imagine yourself in this group of, I don't know how many hundred people, but it was the beginning of this beautiful friendship between Lloyd and the Brahma Kumaris. So can we play this beautiful song by Dave Pomerantz that is entitled Every One of Us?
It's in every one of us to be wise. Find your heart, open up both your eyes. We can all know everything without ever knowing why. And it's in every one of us by
just remember, it's like I've been sleeping for years. I'm not awake as I can be, but my seeing, it's better. I can see through the tears. I've been realizing that I bought this ticket, and I've been watching only half of the show. Oh, but there is scenery and lights and a cast of thousands who all know what I know, and it's good that it's so. It's in every one of us to be wise. Find your heart, open up, open up, open up. Oh, we can overcome everything without ever knowing why. It's in everyone of us, by and by. It's in every one of us, by and by.
That song was dedicated to each and every one of us, that we will each, on this day of Diwali, light our own lights, light the torch of tolerance, and carry it into the world.
What I would contribute as closing is that when I looked at the torch of tolerance, I live in New York City. And so I obviously remember the torch of the Statue of Liberty. So I just like to read the inscription there so we can remember where we've come from when we're looking back as immigrants onto this land, and where we are at now and where we are heading for. And so the inscription by Emma Lazarus in 1883 says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." And under that, it says, to some Americans, the words of Emma Lazarus are our national credo. Others say they're our national curse. What do you think? Credo or curse? Both or neither? And so I think we are at this choice point in our lives. And tolerance is the flame that is included in that torch. And so as we move through, are we heading for that golden door? And who are we handing over our tired, our poor, the huddled masses? And I think it's that flame of love, without which it's impossible to have tolerance. Thank you all very much. Om Shanti.